I'm Joe Mitchell. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives and International Programs at the National Academy of Public Administration. And I'm here to talk with Jerry Galloway, who's one of our fellows and was the chair of our working group for our grand challenge on create modern water systems for safe and sustainable use. So Jerry, just wanted to ask you to introduce yourself and how you've gotten involved with this topic.
Thank you, Joe. I'm involved in water because it's been part of my life. For the last 60 years, I've been involved in dealing with water in one way or the other, principally in the area of floods, water supply, making sure that people have water, because it is the one thing that people just sort of take for granted. And unfortunately, as a result of that, there's always something for us to do. Nature has given us some interesting challenges with natural disasters, which compound our problems in adequately dealing with our water supplies and the quality of the water we have. So it's been an interesting run. I spent 38 years in the Army, a good part of that in the Corps of Engineers, dealing with some of these issues. And since then, I've worked in federal, international government, and others, continuing to work this. I'm now a professor of civil engineering at the University of Maryland.
Well, that's wonderful. You've got the perfect background for helping us address this grand challenge. And the Academy, when we released this is one of 12 grand challenges. They were announced in 2018 at our annual meeting. And 2019 at our annual meeting. And this one on create modern water systems for safe and sustainable use focuses on, the fact that climate change, aging infrastructure, dated governance and management structures, they've all combined to really put an enormous stress on our nation's water system. So we asked we formed a working group of fellows and asked them to develop some recommendations that would be actionable for the administration in 2021, whether re-elected or newly elected. We're recording on October 30th, so we don't know the outcome of the election at this point. But we wanted recommendations that could be implemented and to begin to advance our ability to address this grand challenge. And so, Jerry, you were the leader of that working group, and I wanted to ask you, what were the key recommendations in the report?
Well, the report focused on what the world around us and in terms of what can be done quickly. Obviously, there's a long string of things with water that could fill volumes and would keep the administration busy for years. But given that the mission was to come up with things that you could tell the administration to start work on now, you could actually pass it on to the transition team and have them begin to think about what steps could be taken in the first 6 months, the first 100 days, or even in the first 2 years to deal with these issues. So we were looking for the low-hanging fruit in that sense. And the committee, the working group, looked at everything that was there, the major challenges that came out of the overall review, and said, what do we really need to do? And you go back to something like the World Economic Forum that said, an interesting quote, too much water, too little water, water that's not clean enough, all threaten business and population growth, and shifting water patterns due to climate change are exacerbating the problem. So we are surrounded by these problems that we need to address in the very near future. And so what are the recommendations that come out of this? Well, the first one is not something that is unexpected, but is often ignored. And that was strengthen federal interagency coordination and build more cooperative relationships with the states and with local partners. Time and time again, when you go out and talk to the people in the country and talk about the issues with water, they stress that there are so many people in the act, 23 committees of Congress, people in different agencies, all have a role in water. And it's not as well coordinated as they would like to see. The president recently established a sub-cabinet group on water. That needs to be fleshed out and really dealt with so there's better federal interagency coordination. The group felt that was very strong. On the other hand, the states and the localities feel that they're not often listened to. It's the old Rodney Dangerfield, we don't get no respect. And so we're urging in the report that there's a mechanism that enables the states and local governments to work more closely with the federal government, and that consultation be a greater mission of the federal government in dealing with the local entities. Many of the things that we do in dealing with water are between the federal government and regulations and rules and an individual entity, a locality, a utility that affect them directly. And there's a lot of negotiations at that level. More people would like to be participating in those sorts of things. And in the area, for example, of flooding, the states have a role, and they would like to make sure the federal government recognizes that they too are part of that particular role. They also, we felt in this business of building up better cooperation and coordination, that OMB needs to be part of this game. OMB, in my opinion, and as we talk this thing through, tends to treat water as something that can be put aside for the very same reason that we're seeing it not as big a headline winner as others until we had a Flint, as other stories. They have to recognize, OMB needs to recognize that water sector needs to be given an appropriate amount of attention in development of all strategies, and the strategies for water need to be closely integrated in other strategies, which will lead me to another comment. We think really part of that also is we've got to bring back more federal investment in water resources, and that becomes important to us. Water quality, water quantity, flooding, drought, all require more investment than we're doing right now. And we have that as something that's very, very important to us. But let me put this in a different context for a second and go to the issue of social equity. You mentioned that, Joe, that was one of the major challenges. If we really look at what's going on and we look at some of the challenges that we face in this country, you can see, and I'm going to read you some things out of our report, that there's a disproportionate effect on historically marginalized communities that's creating significant environmental justice issues. And I'll read off some. Unsafe drinking water means that individuals have to pay for bottled water. And the people, if you're poor and you buy bottled water, that's a big chunk of your change, and you still have to be paying the water guy to take care of you. So if the water's not good enough, you don't trust it, you have a problem. Persistent flooding from stormwater, rising rivers, inadequately maintained levees. Where does it end up? It ends up at the lowest level, the lowest areas in a community, and you see who lives there. Again, it's people of color and people of low economic background. So that's a challenge. Approximately 58 of 1,000 Native American households lack complete clean water and plumbing. You can go to reservations, and certainly in the West, it's a very big problem. The same thing happens with colonias in the Southwest, the Hispanic areas of there, where people don't have the basic resources, and it's been that way. We should not have that. 5 out of every 1,000 African Americans in Hispanic families are without working plumbing systems in their homes. That's not very good. And 15 million of our U.S. citizens experienced some form of a water shutoff in 2016. That's the last count we had. But that says that people aren't able to afford what we're doing. And that becomes one of the issues that we think needs to be addressed. The second recommendation is that we've got to incorporate this issue in our water goals. Both OMB, the federal government, OMB is the instrument by which this is promulgated to the agencies. The cooperative relationship with the states has got to make sure that we're taking care of social equity in the way we do things. Just ensuring that they have the basics does not cut it. If you, in fact, say you live in a very inadequate house that gets flooded frequently, we're going to replace it with a house of the same value, that doesn't solve the problem. If the water system is not working or only works occasionally, we're going to get that better. That's not an answer. It's got to be done now, and it's got to be predicted to take care of the future development, the urban population changes that are occurring. This requires, and we say the federal government can do this, is that it's incorporated into the other working groups' goals for social equity, which focus on getting the appropriate data, having these statistics and this information put before the leaders so they can see when we're actually making progress. All too often, we've seen cases where water is addressed, these social and environmental priorities for justice are going to be addressed, but they're not. So we're saying that we've got to make sure that we are setting up a program that identifies these inequities and that we are keeping track of how they are addressed and what progress we're being made. On another level, one of the interesting challenges we have is that we really need to deal with the workforce that we have in this field. Everybody assumes, again, that the water is going to be there. The water is going to be treated and go into the water outside the city, goes down to another community and needs to be addressed. We need to be sure that the workforce that's dealing with this very complex system, it is not simply the old way of the solution to pollution is dilution. You dump it in. We now have to treat. We have emerging contaminants. We've seen the problem with Flint. Some very fundamental mistakes were made. If we don't have trained personnel, our workforce is aging. We had a lot of money in the 70s to take care of our water supply and our water quality, and we've seen that disappear over the years. And at the same time, the people we brought on are beginning to leave. Are we training? Are we building the right workforce? And in a time when we need jobs for people, what a great way to do it. Find out ways to examine the workforce. We recommend knowing what the situation is. That's always the challenge. Understand your risk, preparing programs, apprenticeships, all of those sorts of things that'll make a difference in moving people forward. And the last thing I would like to say is that we've got to take care of, and I mentioned this before, but it's fundamental to all, we've got to incorporate water in the National Infrastructure Challenge that the American Society of Civil Engineers frequently speaks about. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in deficits in maintaining what we have and in ensuring that they're upgraded to meet the new standards and challenges that we have. I mean, you can see that we've been wrestling some of these bears for some period of time. Contamination in the Great Lakes, contamination in urban areas, the problems with Flint, people not thinking and planning through. We've got to make sure that we're thinking infrastructure on a systems approach, bringing it all together. The concept of one water, bringing all the people that deal with water, not just a stovepipe for stormwater, a stovepipe for water quality, a stovepipe for the flood management. We want everybody at the table and we want them to all be working together. That's a busy bit of information, but it says that we know what the challenges are. And there are, I mentioned 4 of them, 4 recommendations we have for starting right now to do something about these challenges. And so I'll stop right there and see if you have any questions.
Well, that sounds like a great set of recommendations. And even though I know we were trying to get to recommendations that could be implemented in just a year, those are a lot of recommendations. So do you have any sense of the relative prioritization of those recommendations, things that maybe should be done first?
Well, I've got to be very honest with you. You don't have to do much more than look at your television to see that in the last 6 months, we've seen the social and environmental inequities that have existed. They've come to the fore. When we see differences in the effect of COVID on minority populations, and we recognize that's tied to the living conditions, the housing they have, and at the middle of the housing is the infrastructure that provides them the water that they need, the water that is necessary to wash your hands. Don't have the money to do it, so you don't use it as often. All of those things say that social equity is something that's very clearly on the front burner. And we ought to get water in that pile, and it ought to be addressed very quickly because even though it's hidden, it's something that reflects very quickly on the ability of certainly minority and low-income communities to move ahead. And so, yes, the priority would be on including the issues of water in social equity in each of the programs. Don't get left out. Don't get left at the station. Let's get on with dealing with some of these issues. We can fight for money. That's going to be important. We can work on the workforce issues, and we can build better cooperation between the federal and states. And we can start that tomorrow. But we really need to do something. This is a matter of it's time to act on the social and environmental inequities.
Well, that's great. And that builds on our public governance and engagement grant challenge, where they did recommend that there be a cross-agency priority goal on social equity, and so you're building on that, and I think that's definitely necessary. And some of the statistics that you cite, I mean, I just think that a lot of people don't know how many people don't have access to safe drinking water. So it's really, really important. So the Grand Challenge, of course, is a broad-based Grand Challenge. So in addition to the issues that were raised in the Election 2020 paper, so focused on next year, what are some of the other water issues that you think need to be addressed at some point by the next administration? Again, whether reelected or newly elected over the course of the 4-year term.
Well, I think that the first thing would be to recognize that we've got many water agreements, water programs that are old, and they're rooted in history. Certainly the biggest one in the West is water rights. We go back to the difference between water rights in the East and West and what that means. California has taken really the initiative to improve some of theirs, the use of groundwater. How do we update all of our agreements that we have among communities within a state, at the national level, to deal with these issues where the original work was done 20, 40, 60 years ago, where previous commissions have looked at this and said, do something, and we haven't. We're still wrestling with water allocation and use on the Mississippi and the Missouri River. We're still arguing about the Colorado River. We've got to be on top of that and to recognize the issue is still here and we've not taken advantage of the information given to us. We've got to look at how we manage at the national level. And we mentioned that slightly when we said that the administration just started a sub-cabinet group on water, which is sort of a surrogate for what used to be the Water Resource Council. The states want to play. And so governance in toto is an important issue. And at the local level and the regional level, they want to play with the state. So it's not just the federal government, but we all have to get together for more modern governance approaches. And then we've got to provide the right scientific expertise to these people at the local and the federal level so that we are going based on science. You've heard a lot of that. Science can be terribly important when you're trying to determine how you're going to use your water, where you're going to get it, and how you're going to live with it. It's interesting, in 2013, the OECD made a comment that we don't have a world water crisis where you see shortages. What we have is a water management crisis. Yes, there are places where there's inadequate water, but there are ways to get water, to get virtual water. In other words, the products contain the water that the people need, dealing with food supplies. What it says is we've got to deal with these issues, and we've got to provide the people the scientific expertise so that they feel qualified to deal with that. At the federal level, our Congress, and at the local level, the state legislatures and the governors and then the local communities. So there's a lot that can be done. And the National Academy of Public Administration certainly has been in the middle of identifying these issues. And there are ways in which getting more scientific support, building technology, can be facilitated by NAPA and the other organizations like it.
Well, it's clearly a very, very ambitious agenda, important agenda. None of us can survive without water, and clearly the United States, we do face some serious challenges to ensure that Americans have, the safe, secure, and clean water they need for drinking and the necessary wastewater systems to protect, public health and the environment. So I wanted to thank you for this conversation today, and also for chairing the working group, because I think that your recommendations really do identify some concrete actions that the administration can take in 2021, to improve interagency and intergovernmental coordination, address social inequities, address infrastructure, and ensure ultimately that the nation has the water workforce it needs. So the full report is available on our website at the same place that you're watching this video. So encourage people to check that out. And again, thank you, Jerry, for the great conversation this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you to NAPA for getting behind this.